Hi, and welcome back. Today we're gonna have a look at frequency shifting with the Doepfer A126-2. Frequency shifting isn't one of the more common used effects, but it offers a lot of possibilities for creative sound design and patching fun, especially within a modular setup.
Het vogeltje moest alle dag naar het bos vliegen en hout halen. De muis moest water dragen, vuur aanmaken en tafel dekken. Maar de braadworst, die moest koken.
In this video, I'll quickly explain the difference between frequency and pitch shifting. Then I'll go over the functions and features of the module, and then we'll dive into a series of patches. As always, you can use the timeline to navigate to specific sections. But now, let's dive right in. Let's start with a quick look at the difference between frequency and pitch shifting. In short, a pitch shifter multiplies or divides incoming frequencies by a certain amount. For example, if you feed a pitch shifter a 1000 Hz signal and set it to output 1200 Hz, it effectively multiplies incoming frequencies by 1.2. So, with the same settings, if you feed the pitch shifter a 2000 Hz signal, it will output a 2400 Hz signal. And if you feed it a 3000 Hz signal, it will output a 3600 Hz signal. In more musical terms, it retains harmonic relationships between incoming signals. This means that pitch shifters are good for effects where those harmonic relationships are important. For example, to add a suboctave, create chords, or transpose entire sequences. In contrast, a frequency shifter shifts all incoming frequencies up or down with a set amount. So for example, if you feed a frequency shifter a 1000 Hz signal and set it to output 1200 Hz, it effectively adds 200 Hz to incoming frequencies. Again, with the same settings, if you feed the frequency shifter a 2000 Hz signal, it will output a 2200 Hz signal. And if you feed it a 3000 Hz signal, it will output a 3200 Hz signal. This means that harmonic relationships are not retained. Frequency shifters are therefore very suitable to add texture, effects, and variations to sound, and are better approached as creative sound design tools. So with that out of the way, let's have a look at the Doepfer A126-2. The frequency shifter is a fully analog module with a compact set of controls. It has a single audio input here at the bottom with a manual level control. The large knob on the top controls the coarse frequency shifting amount, and this little one gives you fine-tuned control, although you can use a jumper on the back if you like to see these functions reversed. There's also a CV input with attenuator to control the frequency shifting with external voltages. This module shifts incoming frequencies both up and down with a certain amount at the same time. With the mix knob here, you can set the output balance between the up and down shifted versions. From only downshifted version to only upshifted version, and anything in between. Again, you have voltage control over this via this input. That also comes with an attenuator. Before that mix of shifted signals reaches the audio output here, it passes through a built-in VCA. You can control that VCA with external voltages via this input, or when nothing is patched in with this control called squelch. This allows you to manually open a VCA when set to the right, use the built-in envelope follower following the input signal to open the VCA when set to the left, or use any mix in between. I'm not going in depth with how this device technically works, but it's good to know it uses an internal quadrature oscillator to achieve frequency shifting. So when you turn any of these knobs to set the amount of shifting, you effectively set the frequency of the internal quadrature oscillator. The frequency range of that internal oscillator is about 8 octaves. From about 20 to 5000 Hz. That oscillator has two outputs here, giving you access to its sine and cosine outputs. You can also bypass the internal oscillator completely by using the sine and cosine inputs here. These are normal to the outputs when nothing is patched in. This gives you a lot of room to experiment. For example, you can take the outputs and process them before sending them back into the module. Or you can use an external quadrature oscillator with a wide range or through zero capabilities to stretch the range of frequency shifting. You can even experiment with feeding all sorts of different signals to the inputs. Although it will easily no longer function as a frequency shifter when you do, you can achieve interesting effects. I find that a frequency shifter isn't a module like a reverb that you can just plug in and it makes everything sound better. It takes some experimentation to find with what setup and in what patches it works for you. Let's start with a simple mono synth voice, made with an oscillator, filter, sequencer and envelope. Run the voice through the frequency shifter and send the result to an outboard mixer. In many cases, you can use a frequency shifter to add texture and grid to sounds by using it as an effect send. So, beside using the output of the A126-2, make a copy of the clean signal and send it to an outboard mixer as well. This way, you can mix the clean with the modulated signal. You can add a bit of audio rate modulation to the frequency, a slow LFO to the mix CV, and play with the filter and balance between the original sound and the frequency shifted version. The frequency shifter also works great to add texture and depth to drones. Use a single oscillator through a filter to create a constant drone. Then add a slow LFO to the mix CV again, but this time use a stepped random voltage to the frequency input. You can expand on this patch by adding a clock and use it to drive a steady kick, clock the stepped random voltage, and finally trigger an inverted envelope. You can use the envelope to duck the filter every time the kick hits. Now you have an interesting rhythmic patch to explore. One more drone patch with a single static oscillator through a filter. This time with two slow LFOs with different frequencies modulating the frequency and mix CV. Beside listening to the clean output, send the frequency shifted version through a panner and use something like a smooth random voltage to spread the created textures around the stereo field. Reverb responds really lovely to these complex harmonics. Of course, these patches are just starting points. For example, you can expand a simple drone by adding a fast delay to add more complex harmonics. Then use a mixer to mix an audio rate signal from a wavetable oscillator and the stepped random voltage together and send a mix to the frequency input. Add a plucky envelope to the mix CV, sweeping from an up to a downshifted version, creating a bell-like effect. And finally, use a simple clock to trigger both the envelope and set a new value for the stepped random voltage. In this case, just listen to the frequency shifted output through a panner. And again, modulate the panner with something like an LFO. Just a quick note, if you'd like to see more modular content from me, or you'd like to support my channel, consider dropping a like and subscribe. Or if you'd like to get access to the PDF sheets of the illustrations I use in this and many of my other videos, have a look at my Patreon. A frequency shifter also works great to add variations to percussive sounds, or even create them from scratch. Here are a few ideas. You can easily add dynamics to a static sample, like a hi-hat triggered by a clock. For example, send a tempo-synced stepped random voltage to the frequency input. You can use the squelch control and set it to the internal envelope follower if you feed the module short samples. But you can also trigger an external envelope and send it to the VCA input to control the length of the sound manually. In this setup, modulating just a mix CV with something like an LFO can create subtle movement without major pitch shifting. Again, stereo tricks work really well. In this patch, a sequencer is used to sequence drum samples. A clean version is sent to an outboard mixer and a copy to the pitch shifter. The output is sent through a panner again, with an LFO sweeping the sound left and right. The right signal is sent through an external delay for some added texture. You can create heads yourself by feeding the module noise and modulating the frequency, or for more subtle effects, the mix CV. Send an envelope to the CV to create short, tight sounds. But of course, you can feed the module anything you like. For example, a mix of a low-tuned oscillator and a crackly field recording. Experiment by melting the envelope to the frequency input to create percussive sounds that go down in pitch. A frequency shifter is very suitable for experiment and exploration. Here are a few more uncategorized patches that I enjoyed. Frequency shifters work great in more complex self-generative FM patches. In this example, two oscillators are used to create a stereo sound. One oscillator passes through the frequency shifter and then a bandpass filter. The second oscillator also passes through a separate bandpass filter. Then the output of the frequency shifter is multiplied, sent to a VCA and passed on to modulate the frequency of the second oscillator. The modulation amount is modulated with a smooth random voltage that at the same time is modulating the frequency of the shifter. Finally, a second smooth random voltage is used to modulate the frequency of both bandpass filters, one with inverse polarity. In this example, an oscillator and filter combo is used to create a simple voice that is sent to the frequency shifter. Just listen to the direct output of this patch. A sequencer is used to tune the oscillator. It also triggers a short envelope opening the filter, as well as a very short envelope modulating the frequency, creating short, wet transients to the sound. A slow LFO is used to modulate the mix CV. But now, let's take both the internal oscillator outputs, send them through wave folders and back into the module. You can modulate the folders with something like a slow LFO. In this case, one of the folders uses an attenuator to invert the incoming LFO. Experiments like this easily destroy the precise frequency shifting functions, but at the same time they can result both into more clean as well as more noisy results. I personally don't use much vocals or spoken word samples in my productions, but it's definitely worth it to experiment with feeding different samples and instruments other than synths into a frequency shifter. Een muisje, een vogeltje en een braadworst waren met elkaar in kennis gekomen. Ze hadden lange tijd goed en in vrede met elkaar geleefd en waren toegenomen in rijkdom.
Het vogeltje moest alle dag naar het bos vliegen en hout halen. De muis moest water dragen, vuur aanmaken en tafel dekken. Maar de braadworst, die moest koken. Wie het al te goed gaat, die wil altijd nog beter. Dus op een dag ontmoette het vogeltje onderweg een andere vogel. Vertelde hem van zijn goede leven en prijs het.
Maar die andere vogel schold hem een stumper die het meeste werk deed, terwijl de twee thuiszitters een lui leventje hadden. It's also a good idea to use a frequency shifter in effects or feedback loops. For example, use a simple synth voice, send the voice to a mixer and the mix output to a delay. Listen to the mix output of the delay, but send the wet output to the frequency shifter and then back into the loop via the mixer. You can use the mixer to set the feedback amount, with every delay passing through the shifter again. Or use the frequency shifter in the feedback loop of a spring reverb. At the time of recording this video, I didn't have access to the planned expander yet, but I quickly wanted to mention it because I know a lot of people will appreciate the additional outputs that the expander will offer. It's a small 2 HP module that offers a set of additional outputs. Most noticeably, perhaps, separate outputs for the up and down shifted versions, making it even more easy to create stereo sounds. It also offers direct outputs of both dome filters and ring modulators, used in the module to create frequency shifting. There's a nice flowchart on the Doepfer webpage if you'd like to learn more about this. The expander is also planned to have a direct output of the internal envelope follower. I hope this video gives you a good starting point to explore frequency shifting. If you have more tips and ideas, feel free to let me know in the comments. Also, if you'd like to learn more about things like quantizers or clock dividers, have a look at any of these videos. And if you'd like to see more modular content from me, smash that like, subscribe and bell button. But that's it for now. Thanks for watching and see you next time.